I'm a shorter than average girl from down under, and today we're looking at the 5th book of LOTR quest, Dread Mountain. This book can be described as the beginning of the end. We're introduced to so many important threads here, which will not only be revisited throughout the stories of Book 1, but also in Series 2 and 3. And a leading reason for this is 1. The location. Dread Mountain is literally on the border of LOTR with the Shadowlands, meaning that we're going to get so many interesting interactions with the Shadowlord here in the future. But not only that, the Dreaming Springs, which we also visit in this book, are a crucial plot point. Another reason why this story can be described as the beginning of the end is because we get, along with the protagonists, a truckload of info, from LOTR's history to strange mysteries and media updates. As an audience, we have a lot to work with, so if you're here looking for some politics, a discussion about racial discrimination with some Aussie inspo here and there, then you've come to the right place. But if you're only here for the book review, you can click at the time shown on the screen right now or the timestamp in the description, whichever suits you best. But for now, let's talk story. Been in the desert with no food or water for days, our trio was parched. So it's lucky that Cree sniffed out a small spring in a strange looking cluster of trees. The Dreaming Spring, water which allows a person to astral project to the place or the person that they were last thinking of before they went to sleep. But if the person has evil intent, they are painfully warped into a tree to join the rest in this strange cluster. So each of our trio check up with the state of someone different. Barda checks up on the Relids and sees that they're doing A-okay. Jasmine checks up on the Resistance and finds that Glock and Narita are now with Doom and Dane. And Leaf visits home. Unfortunately for Leaf though, the forge has been taken over by the Shadowlord and his parents are nowhere to be seen. So the next evening, Leaf visits his father and finds out that he's locked up in the dungeon in the palace, being interrogated for Leaf's sudden disappearance. See, the Shadowlord knows that there is a boy, a man, and a wild girl with a black bird which have been sighted around the times where the topaz, ruby, opal, and lapis lazuli have been discovered missing. And so he suspects that Jared's son is the boy and King Endon is the man.
So they think I'm Endon. My mother would have been so proud.
Yo, that'd be a plot twist, man. Anyways, when the trio wake up, they find themselves surrounded by kin, a species of flying kangaroos native to Dread Mountain. Now endangered, the kin have been forced to migrate to the Dreaming Spring to avoid basically extinction, and they use the spring water to visit their homes every evening. The root cause? Dread Gnomes. The trees native to the mountains are thick of thorns, which are dangerous to the gnomes, but the kin's hide was built to withstand these thorns. So the gnomes used to hunt them to use their hides as a form of protection. But I guess back in those days it wasn't too bad because the gnomes' arrows couldn't actually hurt the kin either. So their numbers were pretty stable. However, now the gnomes tip their arrows with poison, which has become deadly and has resulted in a mass genocide of the kin species. And so this led the kin to migrate. But without the cones of the Boolong trees, the kin can't actually reproduce. So even if the migration has saved the current population of the kin, they're going to get extinct anyways. So when Barda negotiated with the kin to fly the trio to Dread Mountain, Elsa, Marin, and Bruna took the opportunity to repay the trio for saving their child kin, Prin, and to visit their home once more. Now, Barda, he made this negotiation for Leaf's, Jared's, and Anna's sake, because when Leaf told him about his dreams, he became concerned and wanted to speed up their quest so they can go and save Jared and Anna's lives. But anyway, they managed to get to Dread Mountain safely, despite the volley of arrows from the Dread Gnomes. But unfortunately, Prin, who had ended up following them, was not so lucky. But nothing the nectar from the lilies of life couldn't fix. And then the trio's luck sours, for the entire time that they had saved by flying to the mountain was pretty much made null because of a roll attack and days of storms. But look, the gang didn't waste their time. They spent it sleuthing, and they discover a message from a man who'd forgotten his identity, as well as the grave of a man named Doom. Not this Doom, because this grave is like 10 years old. So after the storms pass, the trio find a road to the top of Dread Mountain, where the gnomes live. And the gnomes, they be tricksy. So unfortunately, the gang fall into their traps, including an airtight tunnel with nothing but a mirror in it. To escape, the trio decide to drink some water from the Dreaming Springs so that they can spy on the gnomes and figure out how to escape. And that's when they find out that the gnomes have made a very bad bargain with a giant ooze toad called Gallic, which is basically just a giant cane toad. So this bargain, in exchange of the Gallic's poison, which is something that oozes out of his skin, the gnomes will do everything that he wants. And surprise, surprise, the Gallic works for the Shadowlord, giving him his poison so that they can put it in the Grey God's blisters. So imagine his face when the trio try to use a blister, his own poison, against him. Not to mention that the emerald is stuck on his forehead. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The trio discover that the mirror is actually one-sided glass. So they end up smashing through and escaping. Unfortunately, Jasmine gets nicked by an arrow, and so she's in critical condition. But that's when Leaf remembers that the ruby is an antidote to snake venom, and so hopes that it can also cure Jasmine from toad venom, even though that's actually the ability of the emerald. So he takes off his belt and he gives it to her while he goes and helps Spider to stop the gnomes from catching them. Luckily, the ruby works and Jasmine starts to recover, which Leaf and Barda end up using as leverage to negotiate with the gnomes. After hours and hours of negotiation, it was finally decided that 3 gnomes, Foglin, Glathon, and Renan, would take the trio to the Gallic's chambers where they would defeat him for the gnomes with his own poison. But things don't go to plan. Not just the whole bit with the blisters, but because Renan rats them all out to Gallic. With everything array, Renan decides to take the opportunity to tell Gallic how he should be the leader of the Dread Gnomes instead of Foglin the traitor, which Gallic does not take well at all and kills Renan on the spot. And so with Renan now gone, the attention of the Gallic goes back to our trio, and this is where Leaf makes a split decision to throw the rest of the Dream Spring water into the Gallic's mouth, turning the Gallic into a tree, and the emerald falls down right into Leaf's hands. And so Leaf puts the emerald on the belt in front of Foglin and Glathon, who are absolutely shocked by what they are witnessing. But of course, they were sworn to secrecy, and that's pretty much the end of it. The gnomes celebrate, the kin return home, and the 2 tribes work together to concoct a mixture which looks like Gallic's poison, but actually isn't, so that the Shadowlord doesn't suspect that the Gallic has also been destroyed now, giving Leaf, Barda, and Jasmine just a little bit of extra time to get to the next gem before the Grey God's blisters stop working. Now, in terms of the anime, I actually really liked how they gave Renan a mini redemption arc. I think it added a lot to how the gnomes have now changed and become more accepting to others. And speaking of the gnomes, the whole Glathon revolution was also a very nice touch by the anime. Now, both the book and the anime focus on the theme of politics. And that's to fit with the emerald, the gem of honor. But they both go around it a different way. The book goes around it by negotiation, debating, discussions, allowing our protagonists, the kin and the gnomes, to reach one kind of mutual understanding which will benefit everyone involved. Whereas the anime focused more on rebellion for the sake of freedom, as we can see by Elsa, Mirren, and Bruna when they go against the wishes of Elder Krun, by Prin when she shows up with Philly and Cree against the trio's wishes to save Renan from Gallic. And of course, the whole revolution that Glathon does with the gnomes shooting against the Gallic. So the political focus is different, even though the outcome is the same, which in itself is a very important point to mention. There is no such thing as one answer, one solution, or one course of action when it comes to finding a solution which considers everyone involved. So we're not talking about a democracy or a republic here, we are talking about equality. And so everyone involved must be willing to consider and respect the opposition. When that happens, and only when that happens, can a trustworthy alliance be formed. So this is where we actually get political. So much so that I'm pulling out my trusted Machiavelli for this one. Now, sure, alliances can occur for a multitude of reasons, starting off selfish gain or protection. But the issue with these alliances is that they're under a pretense of being temporary. And it's not like they have a contract as per se to indicate the termination of this alliance. No, it's when one side decides they no longer need the other. And so with these types of alliances, you can't trust those that you're fighting alongside, meaning that you'll always be looking over your shoulder. So that's one type of alliance. Another type of alliance is one that people actually think is a good alliance, but really isn't. Fighting for the same cause. Now, this is where it kind of gets tricky. You'd think that if two parties have the same goals, then it should be easy for them to cooperate with one another, strengthen numbers. But actually, no. There is no point of two sides coming together if the sides don't value what the other can bring onto the table. And a really good example of this is the alliance of men, or the alliance of men and elves from Lord of the Rings. But for now, we'll just talk about the alliance of men before Aragorn receives Andruel. Both Gondor and Rohan were fighting the forces of Mordor, but they had no respect for one another. Denethor's arrogance to prove his family's place as the stewards of Gondor, and to rectify for his mistake of seeing through the Palantir and therefore losing Osgiliath, he focuses all his attention on reclaiming the loss and getting aid. And this aid, mind you, was from elves, or technically by extension, his son, and their plans to use the Ring of Power, rather than the men that his forefathers made a treaty with. Why? Well, it's probs because he believes himself to be better than them, because he's from the line of Numenor. And for all of those that don't know much about Lord of the Rings, I'm really sorry. But basically, he comes from a line of special people which are very well respected. And so he thinks that he is somewhat special too, just because of that. Special enough, in fact, to put everyone in danger by exposing himself and his thoughts to Sauron, and then not even owing up to it. Okay, I know that's too much on Denethor, but man, this guy, he gets me so angry. So It feels so good when. As for the Rohirrim, they felt completely betrayed by Gondor, and so they felt like that alliance meant nothing.
Why should we ride to the aid of those who did not come to ours?
So, despite the goal being the same, respect is also key in an alliance. And this respect has to come from the two sides. Then, and only then, can a true alliance be formed. But how does one know if there is respect? Real respect. As Machiavelli says, you can't really trust a sweet talker or a giver of gifts. So it comes down to understanding. Sitting down, talking lines, priorities, etc., and then coming to an agreement which doesn't overstep anyone's rights or priorities. And guess what? You don't need a common goal for that. All you need is respect. And look, you'll see that although Machiavelli agrees with me to some extent, he says that you can kind of get away with just having honor. But of course, as he says, that's going to have a few caveats. And I'm going to be here showing you why honor is not enough for having a true alliance. And we're going to do that by looking at the difference between dignity, honor, and respect. So first, let's look at these three things separately to get a better understanding of what they are. Dignity is the inherent worth of an individual. It is something innate that we are born with, basically our humanity. It holds to preserve our basic rights, which are given to us because of what we are. Honor is a step further. It is a regard given to an individual based on what society defines as a high status or as a highly recognized esteem, meaning that honor is purely socially dependent. It is defined by the social morality of the time. And so, back in the old days, when they believed that a hereditary lineage was selected by God, this holy status provided honor to any future king or queen, regardless of what their actual personality or characteristics are like. And then finally, respect. Although it isn't seen as such an incredible feat compared to both dignity and honor, I would personally argue it is the one which is the hardest to earn and most important to keep. Because respect describes a personal admiration towards someone else because of their merits, personality, and characteristics, things an individual has built up for themselves. Now, this personality can incorporate multiple social parts, which is the reason why it is such a fine line defining between honor and respect, and why most people would tell you that honor is a higher form of respect because it is considered by a larger majority. But when we get to the crux of it, respect has to be earned by an individual, by anyone, whereas honor is given due to title and status. And we see that in the story, all three play a major part. If we start with dignity, that discussion is mainly had when discussing the way the Dread Gnomes treated the kin. They did not treat them with dignity because they didn't see the kin as equals. And so, because they believed that their lives were more worthy of keeping, it was justified to have a mass genocide of the kin for them to have as many hides as possible so that they, the Dread Gnomes, would have the best protection for their own survival. And unfortunately for the kin themselves, they had to sacrifice their honor to keep their dignity, aka to make sure that they, as people, survive, they had to abandon their home, migrate to the Dreaming Springs and never have the opportunity to produce new generations of kin into the world. And so when Barda, Leaf, and Jasmine provided a few of the kin the opportunity to be able to regain their honor, to be able to become the mothers that they always dreamed to be, they took that opportunity. And that might sound a bit confusing, but the only way I can make this more clear is by understanding the difference between dying with dignity and dying with honor, which may be a bit sensitive. So I would recommend, if you don't want to listen to this, to skip about a minute ahead, and the topic will be back to our previous discussion. Dying with dignity means being able to pass on, keeping every strength and strand of your humanity. And so you find in situations where people are of ill health that they prefer to have a closer but much more controlled death, as they perceive that to be more dignifying than letting their bodies rot away with the condition that they have. Whereas dying with honor may mean to sacrifice your own humanity and your own sanity for the sake of a moral cause. That could potentially be to rescue a friend or a family. In ancient feudal Japan, it would mean to commit subuku if your leader had fallen in a battle. I hope these examples can allow you to see the clear distinction between the two, where dignity prioritizes an individual's sense of worth and control in the world, whereas honor prioritizes an individual's moral standing and the way that others would perceive them. And so this gets us to the discussion of honor in this book, which is focused on the gnomes. So the gnomes are described by two descriptors: honorable and very cautious, which is actually owing to the history that they've had in Deltora. The gnomes are a very resourceful tribe, and they are very self-dependent and reliant to make sure that they survive. Hence the mountains of gold that they have, and the fact that they've survived even though they live the closest to the Shadowlands. So not only do they encounter a lot more danger in general because of that, you've got all the escaped roles, you've got all the Grey Guards, and prior to the Shadowlord's invasion, you would also have gotten Greers and the Green Beasts on the mountain. A combination of all these threats, of course, would have led to the Dread Gnomes developing a very high level of survival based on their intellectual capabilities, as we see in this book. And so their honor and their caution doesn't come from a place of pride. It actually comes from a place where they deserve it. Unfortunately, that has led them to basically suspect anyone which isn't a gnome and reduce their sense of trust. Someone as high-strung as the Dread Gnomes is very difficult to make an alliance with, because it would require a lot of proving to them so that they would trust you enough for you to earn their respect. And that's why in the Secrets of Deltora, when Auden went to Dread Mountain to get the emerald, it was only after he saved the Dread Gnomes leader Azor that he was finally accepted and thanked with the emerald. The fact that in both situations, after the protagonist does something for them, they become so incredibly loyal, shows us that it's not a sticking point of pride for these gnomes, but literally just a sense of honor and precaution due to the lifestyle that they've had. And so if it weren't for Leaf, Barda, and Jasmine, the kin and Dread Gnomes would never have come together again, because that level of trust would have never existed between them. And as far as the anime goes, I think it adds an additional dimension to the situation by allowing Prin to be in the battle against the Gallic and saving Renan from the Gallic's wrath, allowing her to be the catalyst for this new alliance between the kin and the Dread Gnomes, rather than just these three outsiders. And now that the kin and the gnomes are finally on respectable terms again, they can start working together harmoniously, which is something that we will see in the future. No spoilers. So, although this seems really weird to say, it's almost as though they learnt something out of the Shadowlord's handbook. The Shadowlord actually has some kind of level of respect for some of his guardians, one of which would be Gallic. Gallic was just an ooze toad, which is a species of toad that lives between the mountains of Deltora and the Shadowlands. But because the Shadowlord saw this poison as an opportunity to be able to strengthen his forces, he decided to use them. And for some reason, Gallic was this chosen toad. Now, the Gallics and the Shadowlord's relationship could have just stayed like that, a very one-sided, we use each other sort of thing. However, when it came to that fateful day 16 years ago, the Shadowlord decided to give Gallic one of the gems, potentially suggesting that there is a level of respect that the Shadowlord has for Gallic for all his years of service. Now again, this is all basically speculation when it comes to the book, but I think the anime confirms this with Tegan's re-emergal. We can see that the Shadowlord doesn't give two toots about Prandine or Fellow. They're just basically a model that he refurbishes when one of them ends up kicking the curb. But when it came to Tegan, she was irreplaceable, and so he reinstates her. When she doesn't appear, he says,
Tegan has not yet returned with the three thieves. Where is she?
Which suggests a level of concern. Now, we did talk about Tegan in this particular video and suggested that there may have been more to her relationship with the Shadowlord, but this kind of confirms it. It suggests that the Shadowlord does have a level of respect for some of his allies. Not all of them, of course,
You fool!
but others.
Sorceress Tegan, it would not be wise of you to waste your powers here.
And by providing them that level of respect, as Machiavelli says, he ensures that they would obey and stay by his side for longer. So at the end of this entire story, the simple message is we should show respect for those who are different. Make sure that we protect the dignity of every single individual, and honor doesn't really matter much if you don't have respect. And we learn that these three features, dignity, honor, and respect, aren't simply confined to the right side. The wrong side can also have these principles. And that is the reason why there are so many characters that morally we shouldn't like, we end up rooting for because we respect them, we honor them, and we believe that they have inherent worth. These aren't bad things to feel about someone who's bad. In fact, if you don't think that, then there is something wrong with you because everyone has inherent worth. Some people may choose to use that the wrong way, and some people may choose to use that the right way. But in truth, there is only one important thing which makes a person a villain: evil intent. And that is what the Dreaming Spring is all about. It weeds off people with evil intent. In fact, in the Secrets of Deltora, it specifically says that the Dreaming Spring doesn't have effect of people who have inner wrongs, such as being proud or lying. It only affects people who are externally bad, aka act in evil ways. People like Karn 4 and 5 or Gallic. So as far as this book goes, it's actually a pretty good introduction to kids about the issue of discrimination, why it may occur, the reasons why an individual may feel like they need to discriminate against another, and how one can get around solving those issues to hopefully everyone is safe and respected. And it's all presented in such a way that it doesn't seem too political or too heavy for a child. It's just common sense. Now, I am going to admit that with the exclusion of the whole Karn Squad, I enjoyed the anime episodes even a bit more than the books at the end. Like, I think the changes made to the battle against the Gallic made the impact of the story a lot more. I just kind of wish that we had seen a lot more of Barda and Leaf's negotiations, particularly with the gnomes, and of course, the use of the ruby. In this book, Leaf, Barda, and Jasmine expose their secret to a people for the first time. And so it is a book about building trust and knowing when and where the right time is to be able to form strong alliances. But the changes made to the anime meant that they never reveal the belt to anyone, which kind of takes away from that sense that this is the start of the end when it comes to our hero's journey. There is definitely that sense of finality which exists in the book that doesn't really exist in the anime. Although we don't get that heroicness that we see from the anime in the kin and the gnomes in the book, I still think that it's a worth read just to understand their interactions better and make everything feel a lot more real. So that was the 5th book of Deltora Quest, Dread Mountain. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on some more Hobbit Reacts content next week. Make sure to share this with any other Deltora Quest fans or just fantasy fans in general. And remember, be brave, be happy, and be kind, and we'll catch you all next time.